It gives me pleasure to introduce a gentleman who needs no introduction. Our own Gary LaForte. Gary is the grandfather of 6 wonderful grandchildren, and he's going to give us his travelogue to South Africa. Can we please give a warm Rotary welcome to Gary LaForte.
Yes, I know. I have to go through this very, very quickly. I've been given strict orders, 20 minutes, then I get yanked out. This is a talk I've been wanting to do for quite a while, but haven't been able to, due in part because of the availability of both Dan and Deb, because I know they're going to South Africa and themselves, and it's always kind of nice to, sort of have an overview of what you can expect to see. Also, generally when I give presentations like this, I just don't like showing a lot of photos. I like to put it in the context of the country that you're going to. So I'll spend maybe about 5 minutes or so kind of giving you a background of South Africa as of today. South Africa is on the continent of Africa. What many people don't realize is that this portion here below is called Sub-Saharan Africa. And that's because it's below the Sahara Desert. And this is generally what we think of in terms of Black Africa. And this is South Africa right here. This is a bigger picture. South Africa is kind of neat in the fact that it's got a couple of countries within the borders of South Africa itself. You've got the country of Lesotho, and then you have the country of Swaziland. Also, I think Sub-Saharan Africa is a neat place in terms of some of the various names that you have to learn to pronounce, like Mozambique and Malawi and Zambia and Zimbabwe, Botswana, Namibia, to name a few. This is a bigger picture of South Africa. The red arrows are some of the key highlights as far as the country goes. You've got Cape Town, which is really the administrative capital. Then you have Pretoria, which is the legislative capital. We all are probably more familiar with Johannesburg. And this is also the Orange River, which has really been a territorial boundary problem between South Africa and Zimbabwe. Or Namibia, which I'll talk about as well. South Africa is noted for its diamonds, the Kimberley diamonds, located here. It's also
more too, we have them.
Matter of fact, I have a couple of slides just dedicated to that.
Go to West Virginia.
Very inspiring. And then there's also Witwatersrand, which is where a lot of the gold that we hear about from South Africa comes from. Some background information as far as South Africa goes. Its capital is not Johannesburg, it's actually Pretoria. Population in 2015 is about 55 million. I think one of the great events of the 20th century had to be the end of apartheid, which is kind of like racial separation. I'll talk about that in a few minutes too. And a move towards a more democratic form of government. Matter of fact, the first president was Nelson Mandela. Then you have the Cape of South Africa. This is where you find the Cape of Good Hope. This is a gateway from the Atlantic Ocean to the Indian Ocean and out to the Pacific Ocean and Pacific Asia. The first founders in this country were not the British, but actually were the Dutch, and the Dutch East Indies found Cape Town in 1652. Some historical cultural geography. Basically, from 1949 to 1994, they had a kind of a social political structure very, very similar to our racial segregation here in the United States. It was called apartheid, apartness standing for separate development. You had 85% of the white minority in the country controlling about 85% of the land. And the remaining part of the population or of the land was occupied by the southern Africans. They were basically relegated to what were called homelands. They would go to Johannesburg, for example, work during the day. At the end of the day, couldn't stay in the city. They had to go to these homelands, which were kind of like designated. Because of this dissatisfaction, you know, having no say in their country, this basically led to social unrest and an eventual civil revolution or rebellion, quite similar to what we had here in the 1960s, 1970s time frame. And by 1994, it finally did lead to the end of apartheid. In 1994, they held their first elections. Nelson Mandela was elected president of the the African National Congress, and also president of the country as a whole. It's really interesting, even though there was this democratic movement, there was a portion of the country from the Zulu tribe who really felt that they weren't being represented in this new country. So almost from the beginning, they threatened with secession. And so to try to eliminate that problem, they actually took one of the 8 provinces of the new South Africa and gave it to the Swazuli tribe. And so today it is known as Swazuli National Province. The current president is Jacob Zuma. He was elected in May 2009. Some economic geography, long history of economic wealth in diamonds at the Kimberley area, and gold at the Witwatersrand area that I showed you on the chart. Today, the country relies heavily on exporting its natural resources for economic development. It does have some industry in the country, but predominantly, for the most part, a lot of the wealth does come, you know, from these natural resources. Besides gold and diamonds, they also are noted for having very large deposits of platinum as well. South Africa became one of the BRICS countries in 2010. Before that, it was known as BRIC, and these represented countries going into the 21st century that were growing rather rapidly. The B stands for Brazil, the R stands for Russia, I stands for India, the C stands for China, and the S now stands for South Africa. It's really considered from an economic perspective a feather in the hat, in the cap of South Africa, considering it 20 years earlier. I mean, they were a country where there was very, very strong, you know, civil rebellion going on. Some challenges in the 21st century for the country. Internally, they have high unemployment rate, about 25-26% right now. A normal rate of unemployment is generally around 4 to 6%. Poverty, you know, they still have the rich and the poor. Even though they have moved towards a more democratic process, you still find that the white minority from the past still has a lot of control and influence over the country. So wealth is still not being fairly distributed. Same thing with land as well. And surprisingly, for a country that has moved forward so much in the last 20 years, one of the major problems that they have is a very unstable national power system. You can be in Johannesburg in the middle of the day, have a power failure, and for hours it will be down while they try to, you know, solve the problem. Pretty amazing for a major city like Johannesburg. Also, they have certainly the HIV/AIDS problem that we hear so much about. Matter of fact, South Africa has one of the highest concentrations of all these sub-Saharan African countries. And certainly crime and corruption continues to be a problem, especially around the big cities like Johannesburg and Pretoria. Some external challenges, illicit drug trafficking, animal poaching, which unfortunately still ends up being a world problem. Territorial disputes with Namibia, that has to do with the Orange River, which kind of separates the two countries. And South Africa takes the position that they have, their territory extends all the way to the northern border, which is on the Namibian side. Namibia takes the position, no, the boundary between the two countries in the middle of the river. And they have been fighting over that issue probably for 10, 20 years. And it's still not resolved even to this point. One thing I really found interesting about being in South Africa is the similarity with the United States, especially in terms of our history. And I tried to highlight a couple of those points. The Dutch initially came in, then the British followed suit, and they started, the British, because they had a much stronger army, navy, and commerce, started to push the Dutch up into the north. And so it's generally referred to as the Great Trek. And this was the Dutch migration towards the north, just like the American westward migration that we experienced. And obviously, as the Dutch moved north, they started to, encounter some of the South African tribes, like the Swazuli tribe, just as the United States, encountered the American Indian. South Africa's apartheid era is quite similar to our U.S. civil rights era. South Africa had its leader, which took the form of Nelson Mandela, just as the United States had its leader in terms of Martin Luther King. Robben Island, which is just off the coast of Cape Town, is a prison that was used during the apartheid period for black Africans. And when you go to it, it's just like going to Alcatraz off the coast of San Francisco. I've been to both facilities. It was like being in both at the same time.
How many years did you spend?
Last time, Cape Town is very much like Hyannisport and Newport here in the United States. Now comes the presentation. Fast in terms of focus. Fast and furious, but I think you'll enjoy it. Nice collection. First of all, it's Cape Town. Like I said, it's kind of like Newport or Hyannis, a beautiful seaport town. Predominantly a white majority. Also, it's the administrative capital of the country. So when the politicians in Pretoria want to take a break, they end up going down to Cape Town. And that's how it really came about. To justify spending a lot of time there, they made it the administrative capital. You can see it's very, very touristy. A lot of different attractions, a lot of hotels and shops. It also has one of its biggest hotels, the Victoria Hotel, showing the British influence in the country. This is the Cape Town University. It's an open university. It's to both blacks and whites, but as you go through it, you very, very quickly find that it's predominantly white, with selective, blacks in attendance to say, yes, it is a black-white university. But in reality, it's not as you walk through it. And this is going towards Robben Island. And this is looking at the Tabletop Mountain, which is a relatively famous or well-known mountain range in South Africa. Then you have Robben Island. Again, this is kind of like Alcatraz if you've ever been there before. This is approaching the island. This used to be the governor's or the warden's home. Since it is no longer a prison, they've turned it over to sort of a vacation spot for politicians when they come into South Africa. They end up being accommodated there.
Should have left it in prison.
The interior of one of the cells, they were very, very large rooms, no tables. They just had or chairs or beds. They basically were given two blankets, and that was it, a year round. And there'd be anywhere from 40 to 50 people in that cell at any one time. This is an individual cell, Nelson Mandela's cell, while he was there. If you know anything about Nelson Mandela, 27 years of his life was spent in prison. And I think about 17 years of those was spent on Robben Island in a small cell like this. As you can see, I always include myself to show that I really was there. But more importantly, to give you the idea of the limited, space that they had, they were allowed to go out into this yard for about an hour a day. This is the confinement when someone really was a problem or first came into the camp. To isolate them from the rest of the camp, they would put them into these facilities. And this gentleman here was our tour guide. Was really interesting about it is that he was one of the last prisoners of Ropen Island. And so he really had some good stories to tell. Then you can't go to South Africa without going to its coast. Probably the most famous part of it is the Cape of Good Hope. This is me again, kind of showing you that I was there. It was quite a beautiful spot, and this is where the Indian Ocean meets up with the Pacific. And something I didn't know is that South Africa has its own penguin called the African penguin. And this gives you an idea of what it looks like. There were just literally thousands of them at the time that I was there. And as we were traveling through the coastal area, you can see some of the beach area, quite beautiful. Pretoria, which is it's the legislative capital. This is where all the actual work goes, whereas Cape Town is really the administrative capital. And this is the parliamentary buildings. This is a view of the city, a big metropolitan city. Just like here in the United States. In fact, that's one thing that really amazed me as far as touring the country, is the fact that their infrastructure was so highly developed. I mean, even though there's a lot of poverty in the area, they have a lot of infrastructure problems. They have spent a tremendous amount of money in developing their highway system and railway system to get in and around the country. This is a monument within the city of Pretoria, called the Vogt Trekker Monument, which was dedicated to those Dutch that went up to the north, because they didn't want to leave South Africa. It says the monument commemorates those pioneers who participated in the migration between 1935 and 1984 called the Great Trek. During this period, approximately 15,000 pioneers moved northward across the Orange River and Drakensberg into the interior of South Africa. This is another view of the city from the parliamentary buildings. Then you have Johannesburg, probably the best known city within South Africa. Certainly is the one that has the most history. We were accommodated in the sort of the higher income part of the city. You found that there was two very, very large shopping malls. I mean large shopping malls that went for blocks. We were next to Michelangelo. The other one was called, I believe, Leonardo. I mean, they'd make our malls here look small. They were very, very, very large, very upscale, but also this is sort of the tourist business area as well. We saw the Apartheid Museum. If you get a chance, really go and see it. It's very, very nicely laid out. Shows the history of apartheid and the atrocities that took place as far as the white minority treatment of the black African majority. This is the home of Nelson Mandela. Very, very small home, as you can see. This is what the interior looks like. This is his bedroom. They didn't really know whether or not that was his actual bed. He actually never spent any time in his home because most of his time was spent in prison. And so this is where his family resided. This was the kitchen area. As you can see, it's really turned into a museum. This is an interesting picture. The state of Michigan really felt there was a great injustice done to Nelson Mandela. And after he was freed, the state tried to pass a piece of legislation that would find him guilty of all the charges that were brought against him by the government at the time. Never ended up passing, but it was a token, a gesture on the part of the United States, or at least the state of Michigan, that we could, identify what happened to him. This is just a local city in street in Johannesburg. We had an opportunity to go into kind of a voodoo type shop, witchcraft, where you could, get feathers and special herbs. And it was really kind of a neat place to walk through, but kind of scary as well. One thing we didn't realize when we were there is that Coca-Cola is really a very, very large company. About 90% of all the beverage that's sold in South Africa is sold by Coca-Cola. And they do it through these local shops that are owned by people that attach them to their house. And I got a chance to give you a picture of the inside, and everybody would end up going into it to get their local purchases. You've probably heard about the shanty towns. I mentioned the hometown. This gives you an idea of how, even to this day, there's a part of the population that still lives in conditions like this. We had a chance to go inside, talk to the people. The rooms were generally about the third of the size of this room, 1 or 2 beds, a Bunsen burner type bed. Okay, no refrigerator. Terrible, terrible way to live, especially when you consider that this was about 2006, 2007. This gives you sort of a view of what that shanty town looked like from a distance. This gives you an idea of the countryside. Look at the infrastructure. Couldn't get over the highway system, how good it was. We had an opportunity to go to a wholesale store that sold every type of goods that you could think of, kind of like our Costco, something you may not necessarily expect to find in a country like South Africa. I had a chance to go to a lot of cultural events. This was a local event where we had a chance to dress up kind of and do a little dancing. And
You look a little overdressed there.
yeah, it certainly did. Kind of out of place. Actually, I had too much clothes on. And they had dances during the night. We had a chance to try their foods. The specialty, the treat that everybody was encouraged to try was pan-fried worms. They would put worms in the pan, put spices and sugar, and then they served it as a dish. And you had to try it. You had to try it, and I must say it was good. So if you get a chance to try it.
The baked is better than the fried. The fried's not good for you.
Again, this is how we were served. This is a map of South Africa, and it shows all the major game grounds. And you can see all the arrows represent scattered throughout the country. Probably the best known is the Kruger Park, where we spent our time was in Verlaensburg, which is the 4th largest.
We're going to Durban.
And this is how we traveled. Go through this very quickly, but this is the countryside. Just absolutely gorgeous. And this was not during the rainy season, so it was very, very dry and somewhat, desolate. This is the lodge that we ended up staying at. Best time to go is either early in the morning or at the end of the day, because that's when the animals come out to feed, to drink. It's also when the big games come out, like the tigers. Not the tigers, but the lions, to catch their game. These are known as the Big Five: the lion, the leopard, the rhinoceros, the elephant, and the water buffalo. This is an actual picture that I did take. You don't get close to them during the day, but we spotted them off in the distance, and with high lenses, we were able to take that picture. This is a photo. The leopard is very, very difficult to detect during the day because of his camouflage of his skin. So I saw this picture and I decided to show you one of the Big Fives that you very, very seldom will see. And certainly there's the rhinoceros. A couple of elephants. Pack of elephants. This is the water buffalo. The giraffe. the wildebeest, zebras galore, especially at the water holes, the sable antelope, which is a rare animal that you generally don't see, and we were lucky enough during one of our trips to see it. Hippopotamus. How do you spell hippopotamus? I just had a spelling bee contest that I participated in. That was one of the words. Tough words to spell. Here's some more. They love water, and they're very, very docile. You can approach them 10, 20 feet, and they won't even bother you. All types of antelopes and deers. There must be 30 different. Here's, the impala, which is probably the most common antelope that you'll see. Certainly you would expect to see your alligators. There's another picture of him. He was pretty big. He had to be 20, 30 feet. He was big, coming his tail in. The kudu is another type. You buy wild boar every place you go, even in the cities on the outside, you will see them, walking around scavenging for food. Certainly you find all types of monkeys and chimpanzees throughout the country. Anybody know what this is?
Sloth?
Huh?
Sloth.
Anteater.
Sloth?
Huh?
An anteater?
What is it called?
An anteater.
It's called an aardvark. Ever hear of an aardvark?
yeah,
It's an
yeah.
aardvark. Something I didn't expect to find was ostrich in South Africa. Certainly the vulture, and especially where there's any large body of water, you found beautiful, beautiful herons and water birds. I mean, by tens of thousands. It's just incredible. And this is for Dan, because I know that he was going there. We had a chance to go to the Cullinan Diamond Mine, where in 1905 they found the world's largest diamond, coming in at 3,106.75 carats. Ended up eventually being cut down into two stones that are now part of the royal family, UK royal family crown jewels.
Did you get any souvenirs?
Huh?
Did you pick up any souvenirs?
Well, the way that it worked, while you walked through the underground cage, if you came across one, you were required to turn it in, but they would give you half the value of whatever the diamond was worth. And what's interesting, when they dig these mines, what they do is they go down into the various levels, and they'll go down to the 10th level and start drilling in the 9th level. And when they finish the 9th level, then they go down to the 11th level, and then they start mining the 10th level. And so they got the stones falling down into the belts that carries it to the surface. Kind of an engineering feat of how they do that. And this is what it's kind of like, big enough to drive a truck through. This is the Great Star of Africa, 530.4 carats. It's the scepter with the cross, which is part of the UK Royal Crown Jewels. And this is the Lesser Star of Africa, 317.4 carats. It's the Imperial State Crown, again, of the UK Royal Crown Jewels. That's it. Now, Gary,
As a surprise to you, I know you know nothing about this, but Gary has chosen the book On Beyond Zebra by Theodore Geisel, also known as Dr. Seuss.
Oh, thank you very
Thank
much.
you ever so much.
Thank you.